Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Mark, thank you for that wonderful snack. That was excellent.
We're 1 week away from having more.
For those interested in learning about beef jerky, please hire Shelly Chin. He does a wonderful job. Tonight we are learning Maseches Yoma, Daf Pei Aleph. And we're going to be starting about 6-7 lines down from the top of Pei Aleph, Amud Aleph, and we're going to be ending at the very last word of Pei Aleph, Amud Beis. This was a more complicated daf to learn. It took me longer to ingest. And as you can see, Daf Pei Beis, Amud Beis is a lot shorter, so we'll be able to make things up over the course of Shabbos and Sunday. And let's get started.
Can you give a 7-day countdown, like 1 week announcement?
We have a siyum. Is it next Thursday already?
Yeah, 1 week.
We have a siyum next Thursday. Go to alldaf.org/siyum to sign up. I'll send out a link in the WhatsApp group. David, you're going to make the siyum?
Whoa!
I don't recall you mentioning a live stream, any of this at the time.
Whatever.
The host doesn't even get to make it.
Yeah, it'll be a wonderful evening. The head of the All-Daf app, Rabbi Moshe Shway, will be in town. Rabbi Ephraim Twersky will speak, a regular shiur, shorter shiur by me. David will do the siyum, and then they'll show some short video, and then we're going to frest a tremendous amount. No cost to anyone there. It's being covered by the OU. Please feel free. You're welcome. It's our pleasure. You're welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure, and it's not coming out of my department's budget, most importantly. So, okay, here we go. That was already a whole minute of secondary Torah. Says the Gemara, Ha'ochel ve'ashosei mitzarfen. We said that one who eats and drinks, if they only ate and drank a partial shiur, but in total, that new combined shiur of what they ate and drank is that koseves shiur. The halacha is ein mitzarf, and that does not violate the isser of achila on a Torah level. Mantana, who's the author of our Mishnah? So answers the Gemara. Amar Rav Chizda b'machlokes shinuya. This is discussed in a machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua and the Rabbanan, and our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yoshua. It's not. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah writes, Klal Amar Rabbi Yoshua. He says the following. Now, this halacha is an out of left field halacha. It's about comparing different types of tuma to one another and joining those shiurim together. So here the Gemara says, Kol shetumasu v'shiuro shava mitzdareh. If you have two types of tuma that are similar, and the shiur of isser is similar, then those two types of tuma will be mitzdareh. However, if tumasu v'lo shiuro, if it's the same type of tuma but a different threshold of isser, or the reverse, shiuro is the same velo tumaso, but a different type of tuma, or neither of them line up, lo tumaso velo shiuro, neither the type of tuma nor the shiur of the tuma are the same, ein mitzdarfen. So we assume from this Gemara, from this shita of Rabbi Yoshua, that this is like our Mishnah. If two types of meat don't combine because they have different statuses of tuma, so then for sure it's going to be that liquids and solids don't combine. And therefore our Gemara must be like the shita of Rabbi Yoshua. So says the Gemara, lav dafka. We're the first of the medium-sized lines on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah could even be like the Rabbanan who argue with Rabbi Yoshua. Rav Nachman Amar afilu tema Rabbanan. Why could it be the Rabbanan who argue against Rabbi Yoshua? Because Adkan lo ka'amrei Rabbanan hasam elo le'inyan tuma. Only when it comes to tuma do the Rabbanan argue against Rabbi Yoshua. The shem tuma chad he. So Rabbi Yoshua was of the opinion that if you have two types of meat and they're each tameh, but they're a different type of tuma, then they're incomparable. And the Rabbanan push back at him and say, tuma is tuma. They're comparable enough to be combined. So says the Gemara that maybe over there, only over there is where the Rabbanan would argue. Aval hacha, here, when it comes to Yom Kippur and you've eaten both liquid and solid, so there we would say, Aval hacha by Yom Kippur, mishum yisuvei daitahu. The threshold, as we've been discussing, is about Yishuv Adas. And would a person have Yishuv Adas having eaten a total of a kakoseves, but a mixture of food and drink? Says the Rabbanan, no, v'hai. In this case, if you were to eat that mixture of food, lo meisva daita. So that's how the Gemara approaches this. First, we think in the name of Rav Chizda that it's Rabbi Yoshua, and then we conclude that it's not. And then the Gemara literally repeats this again. The same exact thing again. I'll just read this part quickly because it is exactly the same. V'chein, says the Gemara, about a quarter of the way down, Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. V'chein amar Reish Lakish b'machlokes shenu Rabbi Yoshua. Really, it is the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua. Detnan, Klal amar Rabbi Yoshua v'chulei. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu tema Rabbanan. Our Mishnah even could be like the Rabbanan who argue against the shita of Rabbi Yoshua, because Ad kan lo ka'amei Rabbanan hasam elo inyan tuma. The only reason over there why the Rabbanan argued against Rabbi Yoshua is because they said even though they're different types of tuma, but they're still tuma. Aval hacha by Yom Kippur, It's only about Yishuv Das, v'hai, this mixture of both food and liquid, lo kames v'daita. Therefore, in conclusion, our Mishnah, our previous Mishnah, which we just finished, can be like the opinion both of Rabbi Yeshua and also like the Shita of the Rabbanon. Next Mishnah, the Mishnah says a third of the way down on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, new Mishnah, Achal v'shotza behelam echad. Let's say a person ate and drank a lot, but they did it in one lapse of memory. So then the halacha is eino chayev elachatas achas. The halacha is they only have to bring one korban, even if they ate a tremendous amount and drank a tremendous amount, because the shigaga with the helam echad, it was all one lapse in memory. So because it was only one lapse in memory, so therefore you only bring one chatas. But what if you were achal ochlen? Sorry, I skipped a line. Yeah, achal v'asa malacha. What if you did achila and then you were mechalel Yom Kippur, one of the 39 avos malacha, not one of the chameshes sinuim. So you ate chameshes sinuim, and then you decided to, I don't know, you decided to build a house, right? So you did boneh. So then the halacha is that's a problem. Chayiv shtei chatos. Then you're chayiv two different things, even if it was behelam echad, because they're two different genres of isser. One is in the category of inui, and one is in the category of the lamates malachos. We'll see today on today's daf that not all 39 malachos are in fact usher on Yom Kippur, but nevertheless the Gemara here, the Mishnah here distinguishes between the categories of the Chamesh Sinuyim and the malachos of Yom Kippur. Continues the Mishnah, second line of the Mishnah, Achal ochlan she'enon ru'in la'achila. If you ate foods that really should not be eaten, v'shasa mashkin she'enon ru'in l'shasiya, and you drank drinks that should not be drunk, that things that people should not be drinking, and strangely the Mishnah adds this, v'shasa tzir o morias pater, or if you drink some type of fish juice, yum. It's gross. So then the halacha is that it's pater. Okay, but you should just know the Mishnah says that it's pater, which means that it's not considered achila, which means it's not considered food. So we have a Mishnah that says if you drink herring juice, that's not considered a food. And there's a Mishnah to prove it, which just goes to show you that fish don't taste good. That's just exactly what it is. So the Gemara opens almost halfway down. No peanut gallery today. I have a lot of Gemara to cover. Amarish Lakish, the Gemara opens. Now, here what we're going to be discussing literally for the next Amud is the following Shiloh. We know that the Torah is express about the Isser of, about the Onesh of Kares for violating the Chamesh Sinuyim. That we know. Okay. But where is the Isser Lav in the Torah? Like by a lot of foods, we have lo sochal, lo this and lo that, lo sinaf, whatever, all these terms they have them. But when it comes to the Isser of the Chamesh Sinuyim, the Torah doesn't have a classical, what we would call an azhara, a classical of lo sachbod. We don't have a classical structure like that. We just know that it says v'nisem es nafsho sechem, that we know, but it's not like a lo, right? It's not like an azhara, a lav. So the Gemara is going to be troubled with this over the course of this next amud, and that's the sugya we're going to be dealing with. Amar le Reish Lakish mipnei ma lo ne'emra azhara be'inui. Why don't we have a classical isser, a classical structure of lo sochal, for example, by the Chamesh Sinuyim, by Achila on Yom Kippurim? So says the Gemara as follows, very simply, second line of the new Gemara, Mishum de lo efshar. We couldn't write it. What were you going to do? Hechi nichtov. What were you going to write? Nichtov Rachmana lo yochal? Well, you can't say that because what does Achila always imply, like we learned yesterday? A kizayas. Achila could be kizayas. So the Torah could not have written by the halachos of Yom Kippur lo yochal. Maybe we should say nichtov rachmana lo seuneh. Well, that's a very strange language because if you say don't afflict yourself, that implies you should eat. That implies, says the Gemara, kumechol mashma. So you can't say lo seuneh. We don't have a language to use. So yes, we have to stipulate the onesh, which we've done by saying that it's an isur kares, but we don't really have a baseline language in the Torah to record the azhara. So maskef flora of Hoshia, nichtov rachmana hishamer pen lo seuneh. Why don't we add the words of hishamer and pen? You should be careful lest you are not going to afflict yourself. Namely, we're afraid you might eat. So says the Gemara, you can't say that because if you say hishamer and pen in kain nefishiluhu lave, that would imply that there are two lavin, and that's not true. There's only one lav because hishamer and pen and al, all of those languages indicate their own lav. So we're really trapped in the Gemara right now. We don't have an azhara. We don't have the warning, and we only have the onesh. So says the Gemara, let's try again halfway down on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, trying to find a language for the azhara, for the classic Isser Deoraisa of eating on Yom Kippur. Maske Flora Bibi Barabai Nichtov Rachmani Hishamer b'mitzvahs inui. You should be careful for the mitzvahs aseh of inui. Says the Gemara, in Cain, if that's true, then sometimes Hishamer de lav is a lav. That when the word Hishamer is used by an Isser lav, that it's for an Isser Doraisa, like for a Los Aseh, but sometimes Hishamer de Aseh Aseh. Now you've taken the word Hishamer and used it in two split ways, sometimes for a Los Aseh, sometimes for an Aseh. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that because now the word Hishamer is not a lav anymore. It's also for an Aseh. You can't just repurpose things. So how does the word Hishamer work? It's a lav. So you can't use it here for an Aseh. So therefore, says the Gemara, Maski Ravashi, Nichtov Alta Sur Mino Inui. Maybe we should have a language of do not deviate from the Inui. That sounds good because it's not Hishamer pen where you have a double language. It's just one, and it might work. Says the Gemara, Kasha. That's great. That's a great question. It's like a question on a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Why didn't you write this language in the Torah to give us our Hazara? Okay, so we don't have a good answer to that question. Our question that we're asking is, where is the classical lav? Where is the classical lav of not eating on Yom Kippur? And we don't know. We have the onesh, we don't have the lav. So Zog the Gemara as follows. The Tana Maisi La Mihacha. Says the Gemara, where in fact do we learn out the Isser of Achila on Yom Kippur from? Says the Gemara, V'inisim es nafsho seichem, two psukim. Pasuk number 1, we know V'inisim es nafsho seichem, you're supposed to afflict your souls. And Pasuk 2, V'chol malacha lo sasu. So then the Brisa, this is a very, very long Brisa. And here's what the Brisa says from these two psukim. Yachal yehei anush al tosefes malacha. Maybe one would have the onesh of kares on tosefes malacha. What's Tosefes Malacha? So you might be familiar with this idea of Tosefes Shabbos, Tosefes Yontif, Tosefes Yom Kippurim, and that is that we have a requirement to add a very small amount of time before and after Yom Kippur. And the Gemara's question is, what if one were to violate that Isser? Let's say that Yontif ends on Yom Kippur at 9 p.m. and you violate an Isser at 9:04 p.m. So says the Gemara, that's in a time called Tosefes Yom Kippur. And if at the time of Tosefes Yom Kippur, so then maybe you should be chayiv kares then. Talmud Lomar, says the Gemara, you're not. What does be'etzem hayom hazeh mean? Alitzumo shel yom anush kares. Only when you're mamish within the hours of Yom Kippur. Let's call it from Shkia going into Yom Kippur and to 55 minutes outside of Yom Kippur. But at 51 minutes, even if you haven't taken out, even if you haven't said Avdallah or Atachon Antanun, that's not kares anymore. Only be'itzumo shel yom. Ve'eno anush kares al tosefes malacha. And at that time, one would not be chayav on tosefes malacha. So says the Gemara, Yachol lo yehe anush kares al tosefes malacha. I'll grant you that maybe there's no iser kares on tosefes malacha, that one can't be held accountable for an onesh kares by Tosefes Malacha in the time after Yontif actually ends and until the time you take out actual Havdalah, maybe. Aval, maybe we should assume Yehe Anush Kares al Tosefes Inui. But maybe we should say that if at 9:04 p.m., 4 minutes after Tzeisak Kochavim on Motzei Yom Kippur, you do an actual, not malacha, but you actually eat something, and that maybe we should say that there's still an onesh of kares there. Says the Gemara, no, still no. Talmud Lomar ki kol hanefesh asher lo seuneh be'etzem hazeh hayom hazeh v'nichrasa. And we see there the word be'etzem hayom hazeh again. Alitzumo sheyom anush kares ve'en anush kares al tosefes inui. So if Shabbos ends, if Yom Kippur ends at 9 o'clock exactly, then at 9:04 p.m. you eat a whole koseves of drumettes, let's say something along those lines. Just something just popped into my head. So then says they no thanks. I'm a little busy right now. But the Gemara says that at that point there's not going to be an Isser Kares on the Chamesha Sinuyim. So even if you eat at 9:04, 4 minutes after taste, but you're still holding Stark in Yom Kippur, you want to take out you're still saying Kiddush Levana, right? You have it. Still, it doesn't make a difference. Halacha is that there's no Isser Kares at that point. So says Gemara, fine. Yachol lo yehe bechlal onesh. Maybe there will be no Kares. Aval yehe muzhar al tosefes malacha. But maybe we should say that there's an Isser deoraisa, that there is in fact a lav that you will have violated if you do malacha after 9 p.m. on that Motzei Yom Kippur. Talmud Lomar, incorrect. There's not even an Isser lav at that point. What does be'etzem mean? Al itzuma shel yom muzhar, only during the actual day of Yom Kippur, from Shkia on Erev Yom Kippur until 50 minutes at the end of Yom Kippur. That's when we're muzhar, where there's an Isser d'oraisa malacha. Ve'enu muzhar al tosefes malacha. But after 9 o'clock at 9:04, when it's just a tosefes Yom Kippur, there is no Isser d'oraisa. The brisa continues. Yachol lo yehi muzhar al tosefes malacha, but yehi muzhar al tosefes inui. Fine. Let's go through the next iteration. Then maybe we should say that that the Isser lav of the inui, the isser d'oraisa of the chameshes inuyim at 904. Maybe we should say there's no onesh, but there is an isser d'oraisa. Says the Gemara, that doesn't even make sense. We're 2/3 of the way down, two lines before the widest lines of the Gemara at the end of the line. The dinu, does that even make sense? Uma melacha shenoheges b'shabbos v'yamim tovim eino muzar aleha. Just like the malacha that we know which applies on Shabbos and Yom Tov, Eino Muzhar Aleha, that by Tosefes Shabbos there's no Isser Doraisa of Tosefes Shabbos v'Yom Tov. If you do malacha, there is no Isser. So Inui, the Chameshes Inuim, which don't even apply by Shabbos and Yom Tov, they only apply by Yom Kippur. Inui she'eno noheg b'Shabbos as Yom Tov eno din shelo yehi Muzhar Alav. All the more so because Inui is more limited in its reach than Shabbos and Yom Tov because it only applies one day a year. The Chameshes Inuim. Okay, Tisha B'Av, but that whole day is Derabanan. And if Yirtzeh Hashem, it'll be a Yontif soon in the other direction. We won't have any Inui on Tisha B'Av. This is only talking about Dinei D'Oraisa. Says the Gemara, I understand what you're saying. We're still stuck in that we don't have the formal Isser. We still don't know where the Isser D'Oraisa is of eating on Yom Kippur. We know that it's Asr, and we know that there's an Isser Kares that's involved. We know the Onesh, but we don't have a classical formulation of the Isser. Lo Sachmod, whatever, pick one. We don't have that. We're missing it in the Torah itself. So it says the Gemara, Minai. Where then would we find it from? Second of the longest lines on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, says the Gemara as follows. Lo Yomar Anish b'Malacha de Gamar me'inui. When it comes to the Isser, when it comes to the activities of Malacha on Yom Kippur, we know that the Torah stipulates in multiple places that there's an Isser Kares on Yom Kippur. It says it by the Isser Malacha of Yom Kippur, and it says it by the Chameshes Sinuyim. So says the Gemara, the Torah did something extraneous. The Torah did not need to tell me that there was an onesh of kares by the Isser Malacha because the Gomar Me'inui, I could have learned it out from the Chameshes Sinuyim. So the Torah did something extra, and I'm going to learn from that extra wording. Says the Gemara, how could I have learned out the Isser Kares by Malacha from the world of Inui? Well, Ma Inui, just like by the Chameshes Sinuyim, she'enu noheg b'Shabbos v'yomim tovim anush kares. Just like the Chameshes Inuyim of Yom Kippur don't apply on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and we see that Inui by Yom Kippur is Chayav Kares. So too, Malacha shenoheges b'Shabbos v'yomim tovim lo kol shekein. It's a Kal v'chomer. It makes perfect sense, and we should therefore assume that it's an obvious zushtel that from the world of Inui to the world of Malacha on Shabbos, if by Inui, which only applies one day a year, there's an Isser Kares, then it would certainly be the case that by Malacha, which applies every seventh day and on every Yontif, certainly there should be an Isser Kares. And therefore, Lama Namar, why then did the Torah bother to add the words of the Isser of Kares that applies to the world of Yom Kippur? So it says the Gemara, Lama Namar, why does the Torah go out of its way to talk about the Isser, about the onesh of Kares by Malacha and Yom Kippur? Says the Gemara, Mufne. We're getting into the language of Mufne. What does Mufne mean? Mufne is a language that we use when we say that a word is available for a Gzera Shava. A word is available for a hekish. So Mufne, the word is lahakish, to compare, v'ladun mimenu Gzera Shava. It must be that when the Torah speaks about the Isser, the onesh of Kares by the Isser Malacha on Yom Kippur, it must be that it is in fact available for the following Gzera Shava. Nemar onesh be'inui, v'nemar onesh be'malacha. The Torah speaks about the onesh by inui, that there's kares over there. V'nemar onesh b'malacha. It also speaks about the onesh by malacha. Ma malacha lo onash Elohim ken his here. And just like by the malacha in Yom Kippur, there's not going to be any onesh unless there's an azhara. That's a rule in the Torah. You can't have an onesh without an azhara. Don't be confused. This is not hasra'ah of Edim. This is azhara. The Torah needs to tell you the isser in order for you to in order for you to be able to get the consequence. You can't have it both ways. There has to be the onesh that's stipulated. There has to be the azhara that's stipulated. So, ma malacha lo onash, we're 4 lines into the white lines. Ma malacha lo onash elim kain his here. Just like by the malacha on Yom Kippur, lo onash elim kain his here. You can't get the onesh of kares without the pasuk to warn you. Af inui, so too when it comes to the chameshes inuim, lo onash elim kain his here. So this whole lengthy brisa is to teach us that what? That even though the Torah doesn't have a pasuk that says lo sochal b'yom kippurim, but we have the Torah's explicit onesh in the Torah of kares, it's okay. We have the extra onesh of the malacha of Yom Kippur, and therefore we now know that there is an azhara. That's the Gemara's assumption. So says the Gemara, that doesn't work. Ika lemifrach, I could undo your gzeira shava. How can I undo your gzeira shava? Because what did you want to compare? You wanted to compare inui and malacha, the chameshes inuyim to the 39 malachos, but you can't do that. Mali inui shelo hutar michlalo. In regards to inui, there's never a heter of the chameshes inuyim and Yom Kippurim. Masha'ein kain, when it comes to malacha, there is a heter. Tomar b'malacha shehutra michlala. But when it comes to the malachos on Yom Kippur, there is a heter, which is shchita. The isser malacha of shchita does not apply on Yom Kippur. And if that's true, then this is not a level playing field. You tried to make a gzeira shava from the world of Inui that has no leniencies to the world of Isser Malacha that does have leniencies, and that's not a reasonable comparison. So says the Gemara, I think you're correct. That's a great argument. 6 lines into the wide lines, 10 lines from the bottom. Ella, therefore, lo yomar onesh be Inui. Why the Torah should not have then said the onesh by Inui, the gomar mi malacha. We're going to reverse our understanding. We had initially said that the onesh by malacha was extra. No, now we're going to reverse this. The onesh by inui was extra because we could have learned that from the Isser Malacha. How so? Ma melacha shehutra michlala anush kares. Just like malacha, which is more lenient in that malacha has it has a hole in it, and that we know shchita is mutar on Yom Kippur, and there we see that there's an onesh kares. So then inui shelo hutar michlalo, the more chamor case, which is where we see that there's no heter by inui, there's never a leniency in the chameshes inuim, lo kol shekain, all the more so. So what do we see from here? What we see is that we can learn the Isser Kares from the world of Malacha to the world of Inui. And if that's true, then when the Torah explicitly stipulates the onesh of Kares by Inui, it's extra. So therefore, 8 lines from the bottom, Loma Ne'emar, it must be that those words are extra. The words of the onesh of Kares by Inui are extra, and therefore, Mufne, they're now available, lehakish, to make a comparison, v'ladumi mena gzeira shava, to compare and make a gzeira shava. Ne'emar, what's the gzeira shava that we can now make? Ne'emar onesh be'inui, v'ne'emar onesh be'malacha. We have the punishment that's listed in the Torah by inui, by the chameshes inui, that there's a punishment of kares, and that there's also kares by malacha. Says the Gemara, ma malacha anash he's here. Just like by the Isser Malacha on Yom Kippur, we know that there is a punishment and an azhara. So too af inui anash he's here. So now we have this is attempt number 2 at an answer. It's really attempt number 3 at an answer here. The first one was the pasuk that we said kasha. Why didn't Hashem write the Torah that way? Kasha, we have to ask the Eibishter. We don't know. And the second answer we tried in one version of a kal v'chomer, and here's another one. Yet the Gemara rejects this as well. Ika lemifrach. The problem is that again we don't have a level playing field. Why don't we have a level playing field? So says the Gemara, Ma lemelacha shekinu heges b'shabbos v'yamim tovim. Malacha, that applies all the time, every 7th day and on every yontif. Tomar be'inui, she'enu noeg b'shabbos v'yomim tovim. There's also a kula in the inui, and that inui only applies 1 day a year on the 10th of Tishrei and no other days a year. There is no other inui. Says the Gemara, you can't make a kal v'chomer from one to the other. It just doesn't work. In both directions, you can't make the kal v'chomer. You have the kula by malacha, that one of the malachos is always mutar on Yom Kippur, and you have a kula by inui, that inui only applies on the 10th of Tishrei, no other days of the year. So therefore, the Gemara pivots and says, you're right. Amar Ravina Haitana etzem Gomar Mufne. It must be that he learned something different, which is he learns from the pasuk of etzem. The word etzem is used in 2 places. Etzem hayom hazeh itzumo shel yom, and he has another gzeira shava, and that does allow the words etzem must be mufne. They must be available, because the ilo mufne, had they not been available, the Gemara would have posed a whole host of questions. And the Gemara didn't ask those questions, and therefore that's answer number 1 that actually works. Now we have a mari makom from etzem, that from the world of inui to the world of malacha, that just like in the world of inui there's an onesh and there must be an azhara, so too by the world of malacha there's an inui and there's an onesh and there must be an azhara as well. Answer number 1. And in fact, the Gemara is going to support this. Lai, in truth, afnuye mufne. We know that the words are actually available to make a drasha from, to make a gzeira shava from, because chamisha kra'e ksive b'malacha. There are 5 psukim that speak about the Isser Malacha. We're 5 lines from the bottom of Pei Aleph Amid Aleph. Chad le'azhara diyamama. One is the azhara. That's the Isser Lav of doing malacha. V'chad le'azhara delelya. One is talking about the Isser Lav of doing malacha at night. V'chad la'onesh tiyamama. One pasuk is talking about the onesh kares during the day. V'chad la'onesh tilelia. And one is talking about the onesh at night of kares. V'chad la'afnuye lemigbar inui memalacha bein tiyamama bein belelia. And the last one is what we are going to be using from the word etzem to teach us that just like there's an onesh of kares, so too there is in fact an azhara, and this is the support for answer number one. Here's the next answer that works, 3 lines from the bottom, much shorter. All of that was for one answer. The next answer is 3 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Shmuel Tana, Nemar Kan Inui, Nemar Lahalan Inui. We have 2 different locations of Inui where we see the word used. Malahalan Onash, Malahalan Lo Onash Ela in Kain Hisir. Just like by one case of Inui, the case is that you can't get punished without an azhara. Afkan here too by our case of Yom Kippur Lo Onash Ela in Kain Hisir, and this is answer number 2, just the Gzera Shava. So the first answer that works is Etzem Etzem. Gzera Shava. Second answer that works is Inui Inui, also Gzera Shava. Answer number 3, 2 lines from the bottom. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Yalif Shabbos mi Shabbason, Shabbos Shabbason mi Shabbos. Excuse me, I read that wrong. We have the pasuk by Shabbos, which we know Yom Kippur is referred to as Shabbos Shabbason, and mi Shabbos Breishis. What does Shabbos Breishis mean? So if you look in the footnotes here by the Hagos V'Tziyonu, if you have this, I'll just read it here a little slower so we can follow along here. Beautiful. He explains as follows. Kol HaShabbosos Kiruyin Shabbos Breishis. All of the Shabbos of the year are referred to as Shabbos Breishis, the Shabbos that reminds us of creation. This is the sticking point of the Yid, is that every 7 days we are reminded of the Bria of the world. We stop just like he stopped. That's why we have the Isser Malacha. So that's a beautiful explanation of this. He has a lengthier exposition here, but not for now. But the point is that when the Gemara here says Mishabbos Breishis, it's talking about every Shabbos of the year. So it says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he learns out Shabbos Shabboson from Shabbos Breishis. Malahalan lo ana shalim kin hizir. Just like by Shabbos Kodesh, you can't get a punishment without an azhara. Avkan lo ana shalim kin hizir. So there must have been an azhara, and this is the azhara. Fourth answer, Rav Papa Amar, turning to the top of Pei Aleph Amud Beis. What's the fourth answer? Says the fourth answer, it's a play on the third answer. The third answer said Shabbos Shabboson by Yom Kippur, so too by Shabbos Breishis. This answer says, forget that. It's the language of Shabbos. It's the same thing. We don't have to make a jump from anywhere to anywhere. Ikri, says the Gemara, Shabbos Ikri, tishpesu Shabbatachem. That's what the Torah says. I'll just read the whole pasuk. Shabbos Shabboson hu lachem, v'yinisem es nafsho seichem. Yom Kippur is a Shabbos, and you need to afflict yourselves. B'sisha lechodesh be'er me'er, v'adev tishpesu Shabbatachem. Says the Gemara, so I don't have to go anywhere. It's called Shabbos. It says the same halachos as Shabbos. Just like on Shabbos, you can't get an onish without an azhara. So too by Yom Kippur, done. These are our 4 answers. And the Gemara is going to compare and contrast a couple of these answers. Let's just review. There were 4 answers to our question. What was our question? Our question was that we know the onesh of violating Inui. That we know. But what is the classical Isser warning in the Torah? Answer number 1, a Gzera Shava from Etzem to Etzem, 2 different verses in the Torah. Answer number 2, a Gzera Shava from Inui to Inui. Answer number 3, comparing Shabbos to Yom Kippur, Shabbos, Shabboson, and Shabbos Breishis. Answer number 4, you don't even have to do that. Yom Kippur is called Shabbos and the halachos are the same. Those are the 4 answers. So it says the Gemara, comparing answers 3 and 4. Bishlam Rav Papa, I understand the newest shita, the one we just learned, that Yom Kippur is called Shabbos, so there's not even a Gzera Shava. Lo Amar Ki Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he doesn't want to make the comparison of Yom Kippur to Shabbos, playing off the word Shabbos Shabboson to Shabbos Breishis, because the Krad Ksiv Begufe Adif. Because when he looks at the word Shabbos Shabboson, he's like, that is Shabbos. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You don't have to jump anywhere. That's perfect. Elo Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Why didn't Rav Acha bar Yaakov say the cleaner answer of Rav Papa? My time, Rav Papa. Why didn't he look at the words Tishpesu Shabbatchem and say, "Oh, he's right. Of course, he's right. That just like by Shabbos you can't get an onesh without an azhara, so too by Yom." Why didn't he say that? So it says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he couldn't, because those words Shabbat Tishpesu Shabbatchem, those words he needed for something else. What does the Brisa say? 5 lines down. The Brisa says, it says you're supposed to afflict yourself on the 9th day. The 9th day? That's not even correct. Yom Kippur is on the 10th day. Well, you're supposed to fast on the 9th day too. That doesn't make sense. Talmud Lomar ba'erev. No, only at the end of the ninth day. Okay. We should only start by Tzeisa Kochavim. Talmud Lomar b'Tisha. We have to start a little earlier. Okay. What does that look like? Haketzad says the Brisa. Maschil umisane maybe odyom. You have to add a little bit from before the fast starts. You're not allowed to eat up until Shkia. You have to add a couple of minutes. That's called Tosefes Yom Kippurim. Mikan, says the Gemara, this is halacha l'maisa. Shemosifin michol ala kodesh. That when it comes to Yom Kippur, the din is that you have a mitzvah to add to Yom Kippur. So you have to start your fast a couple of minutes before Shkia. Ve'ein li'ela b'knisa. So okay, so far from this brayso, I only know that I'm going into the fast, I have to add a little bit. How do I know that at the end I have to add a little bit more to my Yom Kippur? Talmud Lomar mi ba'erev ad ha'erev. It has to be up until the end, until it's very, very dark out. And even then, so instead of doing 50 minutes, do 52 minutes, whatever it is. There has to be a hosafa to Yom Kippur before and after. Ve'ein li'ela Yoma Kippurim. I only know about Yom Kippur. Shabbosos minayin. How do we know by Shabbos that there's Tosefes Shabbos? Oh, that's what says the Gemara. Talmud Lomar Tishbetu. Remember what Rav Acha bar Yaakov said. He couldn't hold of Rav Papa's answer of using the words Tishbetu. He couldn't use that. Why? Because he needed it for something else. For this, to teach us that there's Tosefes Shabbos. Tishbetu. Eini ela Shabbosos. Yomim Tovim Minayin. I only know about Shabbos. How do I know that there's Tosefes Shabbos, even Tosefes Yom Tov? Talmud Lomar Shabbatechem. So therefore, Rav Acha bar Yaakov could not answer the answer of Rav Papa. He had to go a little bit more indirect and make the hekesh of Shabbos Shabbaton to the world of Shabbos Bereshis. He couldn't use the answer of Rav Papa because those psukim were used for something else. Haketzad. Anytime there's an Isser Malacha, we always have a mitzvah of Tosefes of that day, Yom Kippur, Yom Tov, Shabbos, whatever it is. There's always a mitzvah to add a little bit to those holy days. Okay? The Tana, the Etzem. According to the third shita that we saw, the second shita that we saw on the bottom of, the first shita that we saw on the bottom of the previous samud, as to how we know that there's an azhara for Inui on Yom Kippur. What does he do with the psukim, Hai B'tisha L'chodesh My Abid Lei? So what does he do with those psukim that say B'tisha L'chodesh? What does he do? So it says the Gemara, Mi Baile L'chadatani Chia Bar Rav Mi Difti. What did Chia Bar Rav Mi Difti say? The Tani Chia Bar Rav Mi Difti B'nisam Tav Shorsechem B'tisha V'chi B'tisha Misanen V'alo Be'esor Misanen. So he says you can't be there on the 9th day that we fast. We know that the fast is on the 10th day. So then, according to the Shita who holds Etzem, that the way that we know that there is an azhara for Inui on Yom Kippur is from that Gzeira Shava. What does he do with the pasuk of Tisha? Ella lomar lach, a famous Gemara. Kol ha'ochel v'shosev b'sishii. Anyone who eats and drinks on the 9th day of Tishrei, ma'aleh alav hakasav kilu isana tishii v'asiri. Don't ever go to Dunkin' Donuts on Erev Yom Kippur. That's the rule, because there's a mitzvah to eat on that day. If you eat on the 9th of Tishrei, it's ki'ilu, you've eaten on the 10th. It's ki'ilu, you haven't eaten on the 10th of Tishrei. You get a big mitzvah. It's a very big mitzvah. Okay, that brings us to the 2 dots halfway down. The rest of the Gemara is easier, even though it's shorter. We're going till the end of the page. Let's continue. Achal ochlen. Let's talk about foods that are inedible. Amarava, kas, if a person chews pilpale, biyoma de kipure pater, if you chew like a whole peppercorn, like the little sphere of pepper, the one that you would grind in a fancy grinder, so those, you're pater if you eat those. You're also going to need a drink if you eat those. That can't be enjoyable. But says the Gemara, your pater, it's not considered regular achila. The Gemara also has kas zan gibila. If a person eats zan gibila, which is ginger, but yoma de kipure pater, that's also not considered a regular food. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. Why does the Torah say that it's also eitz ma'achal? When the Torah speaks about the isra of orla, first 3 years you can't eat it. Why does it refer to the fruits as eitz ma'achal? The rest of the pasuk, el tamalomar eitz ma'achal, eitz shetam eitzo upirio shave. We're talking about specifically a tree that tastes like the growth of the tree itself. Haviyomer zepilpulin lamedcha. What does that teach you? Shapilpulin chayavin beorla. That teaches you that peppercorns are chayav in orla, which means that peppercorns are food. But you just said that if you eat peppercorns, you're pater on Yom Kippur. But it's a food. It's chayav in orla. So if it's chayav in orla, it's a food. But you can't say that on Yom Kippur if you eat it, you're pater. And finishing up the brayso, Eretz Yisrael chaser rakul. Eretz Yisrael has everything. Shenemar lasechzar kolba. So that's a kasha on Rava, because Rava said that kas Pilpale b'yom kippur pater. How can you say that? It's chayiv and orla. Says the Gemara, last short line, lo kasha b'retivta. One is when it's still moist, and the other is biabeshta v'habiyabeshta. So Rashi highlights the distinction. If you look at Rashi, 3/4 of the way down, Rashi divar maskal retiva chazin lemechal. When it's more moist, it's edible. When it's already dried out, that's already inedible. So what Rava was talking about was the one that was yavesh, the one that was yabeshta. First long line, Amar le Ravina, hold on one second. Amar le Ravina le Ramim, Rav Amar Rav Nachman, hi himlasa. Himlasa is a kind of food that was a mixture of honey and ginger. Says the Gemara, and it comes from the Asimi Be Handoi Sharia. It's a type of food that comes from a non-Jewish community. They cooked it, and the halacha is that Sharia, namely, that there's no isser of bishul akum on this food. Why not? So when it comes to the world of bishul akum, this is also halacha l'maisa. If a goy is going to prepare foods for you that are edible without cooking them, then there's no isser of bishul akum. So let's say, for example, you have a non-Jew who is standing with a kosher frying pan and kosher vegetables and kosher oils, and they cut up for you strips of red pepper and a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables, whatever they are. And he stirs them up for you and puts them on a platter. That's mutter, mamish. You don't have to turn on the fire. You don't have to do anything. There's no isser of bishul akum when a food is edible, when it's ne'echal chai, when it can be eaten raw. No problem at all. Scrambled eggs have to be scrambled to be the eggs. Nobody eats raw eggs. No normal people eat raw eggs. So that's not okay. So then that you need someone to watch over you for. Fine. But here it's totally mutter. What do we see from here? It's a food. We see that ginger is a food because it's called himlasa. It's made out of ginger. You said, Rava, that someone who eats ginger, you said that they're putter. Why are they putter? It's a food that's ne'echal chai. People eat it raw all the time. The haraya, it's mutter by bishul akum because we don't care if it's bishul akum because it's ne'echal chai. So that shows us that raw ginger is perfectly fine. And we make a borei priyadama. This is another remez. When you eat something that's not eaten normally in that way, even if it grows from the ground, you don't make that bracha. If you were to eat a piece of rice plain, uncooked, the bracha shehakol. It's not mizon. It says not food. Okay, you're eating sustenance of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, so you have to make a shehakol, but it's not a food. So it says the Gemara, Kasha and Rava. How can you say, Rava, that if you eat, what's the word in Aramaic? Zin Gibala? Zin Gibal? No, Zan Gibila. When you eat ginger, that you're going to be pater. Why? Says Gemara, Lo kasha habiratifta habiyabeshta. Same answer as before. That when it's moist, yes, it's considered a food. Once it's dried out, it's not. So the case by the behundoi, the non-Jews who were cooking it, that was talking about when it was still moist. But once it's dried out, that's what Rava was talking about, where you would have been pater on its achila. Tan Rabban and the rabbis taught us, Achal ale kanim pater. If you eat the leaves of reeds, you're exempt. Lul vegefanim chayav. But if you ate the lulavim, if you ate the branches of a gefen, of a vine, so then chayav. Eluhein lul vegefanim. How do we define the time frame in which these are still considered edible? Amar Rav Yitzchak Magdala kol she lav levome Rosh Hashanah ad viad Yom Kippur, a 40-day span from Aleph Tishrei, 10 days, sorry. Rosh Hashanah by Yom Kippur, only 10 days. Rav Kahana expands it. Rav Kahana Amar Kol Shloshim Yom. It's anything up to 30 days is considered to be the lulavim on which you be chayav. Tanya Kavasa, Rav Yitzchak Magdala, Achal is a brisa that supports the first sheet that it's only 10 days. Achal ale kinim, pater v'lulav egefanim chayav. Elu hein lulav egefanim kol shalav levo. Any the branches that grow me Rosh Hashanah by Yom Kippur in that 10-day span. Anything outside of that, you'd be pater. But if you ate those leaves and branches during that 10-day span, or that grew in that 10-day span, Yutaka would be chayav. Last sugya for the night. Shasa tzira murias pater. If anybody drinks fish brine, they're going to be pater. However, the Mishnah makes a diuk. The Gemara makes a diuk on our Mishnah. Chometz chayav. But if one were to eat vinegar or drink vinegar, that doesn't sound very tasty. Put a little bit of vinegar on salad, maybe. But to drink vinegar out of the container, that does not sound so good. However, the Gemara says that you be chayiv on that. Must need some money. Who is that shita like? It must be Rebbe. Why? The Tanya. Rebbe says, Rebbe Omer chometz meshivas nefesh. That creates a meshivas nefesh. It makes a person feel better, right? It improves their life. Darash Rav Gidal Bar Menashe Biri Deneresh. Rav Gidal Bar Menashe from the city of Biri Deneresh. He says, Ein halacha k'Rebbe. We don't hold like Rebbe. Namely, we don't hold that chometz is fulfilling. Oh, so what happened the next year on Yom Kippur? Lashana, the next year, nafke kule alma, everyone left shul. Mazgu b'shasu chala. They diluted vinegar and they're kicking it back, sitting outside. Why? It doesn't sound so frum. They were all sitting there drinking outside on Yom Kippur. But don't worry, because we paskin not like Rebbe, says the Gemara. We don't paskin like Rebbe. Rebbe said it's Meshivas HaNefesh. They held it's not Meshivas HaNefesh. So they're sitting there drinking, they're drinking diluted vinegar. So Shama Rebbe Gidol v'ikpid. He's like, you guys totally misunderstood me. He was very upset about it. V'ikpid. Literally, he's strict, but it means in context he was upset. What was he upset about? Omar, Eimar Damre on-the-daf. What I was saying is Bidi Evet. Lichatchila mi'amre. I never said that it's lichatchila to drink this. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Eimar Damar on a purta. I said, fine, you can have a little bit. I never implied you could sit there and drink a whole glass of it. Tuva mi'amre. Of course you can't drink a lot of it. And for the last line of the day, Eimar Damre ana chai. I was only talking about undiluted, the way that it's made, the way that we make it. But you sat there, Mazug, you sat there and you diluted it. I never said such a thing. So even if we paskin against Rebbe, even if we hold that drinking vinegar on Yom Kippur is not Meshivas HaNefesh, it's not a heter to drink it, that's totally ridiculous. We'll stop right here. We'll pick up on Shabbos an hour before Mincha on Daf Pei Beis, Amud Aleph at the very top. And please remember to sign up at all-daf.org/siyum. Looking forward to a beautiful night next Thursday. And a special thank you to Mark Halpert for hosting the Siyum next week. Wishing you all a beautiful night. I'm trying to talk over Mark's voice.